In the quiet village of Millhaven, where ancient oaks line cobblestone streets and everyone claims to know their neighbors, Tom Barrett was just doing his job. A simple fence repair at the edge of the old Morrison estate. That's when he found it, weathered wood concealing something that should have stayed buried. A small brass box, its surface green with age, and beside it, words carved decades ago, "God forgive us all." Inside lay evidence of a truth so dark it would shatter the village's carefully maintained facade. Now Tom must decide, reveal what happened on that forgotten summer night in 1962, or become another keeper of Millhaven's poisonous secret. What could be so terrible that an entire village would conspire to keep it hidden for over 60 years? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had started like any other in Tom Barrett's 23 years as Millhaven's handyman. He'd opened his weathered leather work ledger over coffee at Mason's diner, reviewing the day's appointments in the same methodical way his father had taught him. The ledger was more than just a schedule. It was a chronicle of the village's small repairs and gradual decay, each entry telling its own story. "The usual, Tom?" Mary Mason asked, already pouring his second cup. She'd been serving him breakfast since he took over his father's business, watching his hair gradually silver at the temples. "Thanks, Mary." He traced his finger down the day's list. "Got the Morrison estate fence today." Mary's hand trembled slightly, coffee splashing onto the countertop. The Morrison place. Didn't know anyone was living there these days. New owner. Some investment company bought it last month. Tom watched her carefully. "You okay?" "Just surprised is all." She wiped the counter with more force than necessary. "That place has been empty so long." Tom nodded, making a mental note of her reaction. It wasn't the first time he'd noticed how the mere mention of the Morrison estate could change the atmosphere in a room. The property sat at the edge of Millhaven like a dark footnote to the village's otherwise picturesque story. 40 acres of overgrown gardens and fading grandeur surrounded by a fence that had been falling apart for decades. The ledger entry was simple. Morrison Estate. NE Fence. Repair client Meridian Holdings. But as Tom pulled up to the property later that morning, nothing about it felt simple. The iron gate still bore the Morrison family crest, though rust had nearly eaten through the metal. Beyond them, the mansion's windows stared down at him, like tired eyes. He'd brought his father's old toolbox, its dents and scratches, as familiar as an old friend. Inside, decades of accumulated tools told their own history. The hammer with the worn handle that had built half the garden fences in Millhaven, the level that never quite read true but his father had sworn by, the ancient measuring tape that had marked out countless projects. The northeast section of fence was worse than he'd expected. Weather and neglect had rotted through most of the posts, and thick ivy obscured whatever damage lurked beneath. Tom set to work with the deliberate patience that had become his trademark, carefully documenting each step in his work journal, another habit inherited from his father. It was nearly noon when he found it. He'd been clearing ivy from a particularly damaged section when his pry bar struck something solid behind one of the posts. The brass box was small, no larger than a paperback book, its surface corroded to a dull green. But it was the words carved into the post that made his blood run cold. "God forgive us all." Tom sat back on his heels, studying the discovery. In 23 years of repairs around Millhaven, he'd found plenty of forgotten things. Old toys, lost tools, once even a wedding ring that had been missing for a decade. But something about this box felt different. Perhaps it was the way it had been so carefully hidden, or maybe it was those 4 carved words that seemed to carry the weight of confession. He was reaching for the box when a voice broke the silence. "Mr. Barrett, I hope you don't mind me checking on your progress." Tom turned to find a woman in an expensive suit standing a few yards away. Diana Chen, according to the work order, the representative from Meridian Holdings, Ms. Chen. He straightened up, instinctively moving to block the box from view. Just getting started on the worst section. She nodded, but her eyes were scanning the fence line with an intensity that seemed out of place for a routine repair. Find anything interesting? The question hung in the air between them. Tom thought of Mary's trembling hand at the diner, of the way people still lowered their voices when they spoke of the Morrison family. Just rot and ivy so far, he said carefully. These old fences, they tend to hide their damage. Yes, she smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. Old things often do. Please let me know if you discover anything that might affect the repair schedule. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking on the gravel path. Tom waited until she was out of sight before slipping the box into his toolbox. He couldn't have explained why he did it, except that 23 years of working in Mill Haven had taught him to trust his instincts. And everything about this situation, Mary's reaction, Miss Chen's careful questions, those carved words, was setting off warning bells. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of physical labor, but Tom's mind kept returning to the box. He worked until the lengthening shadows made it impossible to continue, then packed up his tools with the same methodical care he always did. Back in his truck, he pulled out his work ledger and made the day's entry. Morrison Estate, any fence, day 1, significant rot discovered, additional repairs needed. He paused, pen hovering over the paper, then added a small mark in the margin, a habit his father had used to note when a job held more than met the eye. As he drove home through Mill Haven's quiet streets, past the shops closing for the day, and the neighbors walking their dogs, Tom couldn't shake the feeling that he'd stumbled onto something that would change everything. The brass box sat in his toolbox, like a secret waiting to be told, and those carved words echoed in his mind. God forgive us all. What had happened at the Morrison estate all those years ago, and more importantly, who had gone to such lengths to hide it? Mill Haven's library occupied an old Victorian mansion on Cedar Street, its red brick walls covered in creeping ivy that had witnessed generations of secrets. Tom hadn't visited since his father's passing, when he'd searched for old building codes in the local history section. Now, as he climbed the worn stone steps, the brass box weighed heavy in his jacket pocket. The front desk stood empty, but he could hear movement in the stacks. Following the sound, he found a young woman shelving books, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun. She turned at his approach, and Tom noticed her eyes first, intelligent, observant, with something that suggested she carried her own share of questions about Mill Haven. "Can I help you find something?" Her voice was warm but professional. "I hope so. I'm looking for old copies of the Village Chronicle, specifically from 1962. She tilted her head slightly. "That's an interesting year to research. I'm Sarah Chen, by the way. Tom Barrett, the handyman." She smiled. "You fixed my grandmother's porch steps last spring." "Chen?" Tom remembered Diana Chen from the Morrison estate. "Any relation to Diana?" "Chen, my aunt." Sarah's expression flickered. "Though we're not exactly close. The 1962 chronicles are in the archive room. Follow me." The archive room smelled of old paper and dust, its walls lined with bound volumes of Mill Haven's history. Sarah moved with practiced efficiency, pulling out a large leather-bound book. "Here we go. 1962. She placed it on a reading table, then hesitated. "Mind if I ask why, that year in particular?" Tom considered his response carefully. "Found something interesting during a repair job. Thought the chronicles might shed some light." "At the Morrison estate?" When Tom looked surprised, she continued, "Small village. News travels fast, especially about that place." She opened the volume, and Tom noticed her hands weren't quite steady. The pages crackled as she turned them, revealing columns of faded text and grainy photographs of a Mill Haven from 6 decades past. "That's odd," Sarah murmured. "What is?" Several pages are missing, August through October. She showed him the rough edges where papers had been carefully removed. And look at this. She pointed to a small article from July 1962. The headline read, "Local youth missing, foul play not suspected." Below it, someone had drawn a tiny symbol in faded ink, a circle with a line through it. "I've seen that mark before," Sarah said quietly, "in other volumes from that time, always next to certain articles." Tom pulled out his father's work ledger. "Like this?" He showed her the margin mark he'd made yesterday. Sarah's eyes widened. "Yes, exactly like that. Your father's ledger." He never told me what the mark meant, just that it was important to keep track of certain jobs. Tom, Sarah, glanced around the empty room. "There's something else you should see." She disappeared into the stacks, returning with a thin file folder. Inside was a single photograph, yellowed with age. It showed a group of Millhaven's prominent citizens standing in front of the Morrison estate. Tom recognized some faces from old family photos around the village. In the background, partially obscured by shadows, stood a familiar fence. "This was taken in June 1962, Sarah said. 2 months before the missing pages. I found it when I was organizing my grandmother's things after she passed. She's in the photo. There, on the left." Tom leaned closer. A young Asian woman stood, slightly apart from the group, her expression unreadable. "Your grandmother worked for the Morrisons?" "She never talked about it. But after she died, I found letters." Sarah's voice trailed off as the library's front door chimed. Footsteps approached the archive room. "Sarah, are you back here?" Diana Chen's voice carried through the stacks. Sarah quickly slid the photograph back into its folder. "Coming, Aunt Diana." She turned to Tom, speaking rapidly in a low voice. "Be careful with whatever you found. Some people in this village, they've spent a lifetime keeping certain things buried." She hurried out, leaving Tom alone with the incomplete chronicle and more questions than answers. He studied the missing pages' rough edges, wondering what secrets they had contained. Outside the archive room's window, an elderly man stood on the sidewalk, staring up at him. When Tom blinked, the man was walking away, but something had been left on the library steps, a single page torn from an old journal. By the time Tom made it outside, the page was gone, but the message had been clear. Someone was watching, and they knew exactly what he was looking for. That evening, as Tom sat at his kitchen table examining the brass box, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Some secrets are kept for a reason. Walk away, Mr. Barrett." He set the phone down and picked up his father's ledger again, studying those simple margin marks with new eyes. How many of Millhaven's secrets had his father uncovered during his years of repairs? And how many had he chosen to keep? The brass box sat before him, its corroded surface reflecting the kitchen light. Tom ran his fingers over its seam, feeling the years of secrets sealed within. Whatever was inside had been important enough for someone to hide it behind that fence post, important enough to carve a desperate plea for forgiveness, important enough perhaps to kill for. The next morning found Tom back at Mason's diner, but this time he wasn't alone. Sarah Chen sat across from him, her grandmother's photo album open between them. Outside, rain streaked the windows, turning Millhaven streets into mirrors that reflected the grey sky. "My grandmother, Mai Chen, came to Millhaven in 1960, Sarah explained, turning pages with careful fingers. "She was one of the first Asian immigrants in the village. The Morrisons hired her as their housekeeper." The album told its own story through carefully preserved photographs. Mai Chen as a young woman, standing proudly in front of the Morrison estate. Group shots of household staff, candid moments caught in black and white, garden parties, village festivals, daily life in a world long gone. "She was more than just their housekeeper, wasn't she?" Tom asked, noting how Mai appeared in photos where other staff didn't, always slightly apart, but present at intimate family gatherings. Sarah nodded slowly. "She became Mrs. Morrison's confidant. My grandmother, she saw things, heard things. She pulled out a photograph that had been tucked between pages. "Look at this." The image showed Mai standing beside a younger woman Tom didn't recognize. Both of them beneath the northeast section of fence, the same section where he'd found the box. "That's Eleanor Morrison," Sarah said quietly. "The daughter. She disappeared in August 1962. The official story was that she ran away to New York. But my grandmother—" She glanced around the nearly empty diner. "Maybe we should continue this somewhere else." They ended up in Sarah's small office at the library, where morning light filtered through tall windows. She pulled a leather-bound diary from her desk drawer. "I found this after my grandmother passed last year. It's her personal journal from 1962. Sarah's hands trembled slightly. "I've only translated parts of it. She wrote in Mandarin." "But what?" "I've read. It changes everything I thought I knew about my family's history here." Tom leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "According to this, Eleanor Morrison didn't run away. She was pregnant." Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. "And the father? He was someone powerful in the village, someone married. There was a confrontation at the estate. After that, Eleanor vanished and my grandmother—" She swallowed hard. "My grandmother helped cover it up." "Why?" "Protection. The Morrisons offered her something she couldn't refuse, a future for her. A family in America. My father was just a baby then." Sarah's fingers traced the diary's worn cover. "She carried that guilt for the rest of her life." Tom thought of the words carved into the fence post. "God forgive us all." "Yes." Sarah opened the diary. "There's more. The night Eleanor disappeared, my grandmother wrote about a box. Something Eleanor had given her to keep safe, but the next several pages are torn out, like the village chronicle," Tom said. "Exactly like that. It's as if someone went through every record from that time, removing anything that might—" She broke off as footsteps approached her office. Diana Chen appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Sarah, I thought I heard voices." Her eyes moved to Tom, then to the diary on the desk. "Mr. Barrett, still working on that fence repair?" "Just consulting about some historical aspects of the property," Tom said smoothly. "Miss Chen has been very helpful." "I'm sure she has." Diana's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Sarah, the board meeting starts in 10 minutes. Don't be late." After she left, Sarah quickly wrapped the diary in a cloth and handed it to Tom. "Take it. I don't think it's safe here anymore. But Tom—" She gripped his arm. "Be careful. My grandmother wrote something else about a group of families who made a pact. She called them the Circle. The symbol in the chronicle," Tom realized. "The circle with the line. Yes, they're still here, still protecting their secret. And my aunt—" Sarah glanced toward the door. "I think she's one of them." Later that afternoon, Tom sat in his workshop, the diary beside him and the brass box in his hands. He'd spent hours trying to open it without damage, knowing that whatever was inside might be fragile after 60 years. Finally, he heard a click. The lid lifted slowly, revealing its contents: a stack of letters, a small key, and a photograph. The image showed Eleanor Morrison with a man whose face had been carefully cut out, but Tom recognized the signet ring on his hand. He'd seen its twin just that morning in the diner on the finger of one of Millhaven's most respected citizens. His phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Last warning. Some doors should stay locked." Tom looked at the key from the box, wondering what door it was meant to open and whether he was ready to face what lay behind it. The property deed lay on Detective James Porter's desk, its yellowed pages telling a story that didn't quite add up. Tom sat across from him in the small office at Millhaven's police station, watching the detective's weathered face as he studied. "The document. So you just happened to look up the Morrison estate's ownership history." Porter's voice carried the skepticism of 20 years on the force. "I like to know who I'm working for," Tom replied carefully. The property transfers seemed unusual. Porter laid out the documents in sequence. The Morrison estate had changed hands 6 times since 1962, each sale occurring exactly 10 years apart. Each new owner, a different shell company that dissolved. Shortly after purchase, like clockwork, Porter mused, until this last sale to Meridian Holdings. He looked up at Tom. 2 months ahead of schedule, almost like someone broke pattern, or lost control of the timeline, Tom suggested. Porter's eyes narrowed. You're not just here about property deeds, are you, Mr. Barrett? Before Tom could respond, a commotion erupted in the station's front office. Through the open door, they could see George Whitaker, Millhaven's mayor, engaged in heated conversation with the desk sergeant. Everything all right out there? Porter called. Whitaker appeared in the doorway, his usual polished demeanor slightly frayed. The signet ring on his right hand caught the fluorescent light, identical to the one in Eleanor Morrison's photograph. James, Whitaker's voice was tight, didn't expect to find you in today, on your day off. Just catching up on some paperwork. Porter's tone was neutral, but Tom noticed how he casually shifted some files to cover the property deeds. Something we can help you with? Whitaker's gaze swept over Tom. No, nothing urgent. Though I did hear about some vandalism at the Morrison property, thought I should check if you're investigating. First I'm hearing of it, Porter said. But then I've been off duty. Of course. Whitaker smiled thinly. Well, keep me informed. That property's development is crucial to our village's future. After he left, Porter waited exactly 30 seconds before closing his office door. Interesting timing, his visit. Almost like someone told him you were here. He pulled out a thick file from his bottom drawer. Want to tell me what you really found at that fence, Mr. Barrett? Tom hesitated, then reached into his jacket and withdrew Mai Chen's diary. Only if you tell me what's in that file first. Porter studied him for a long moment, then opened the folder. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, spanning decades. Each showed the Morrison estate's fence line, taken from slightly different angles. Every October since 1962, Porter explained, someone has reported suspicious activity around that property. Every time we investigate, every time we find nothing. But he spread out the photos. Every time that fence has been freshly repaired. Small sections, different spots, like someone's been searching for something. Or checking if something's still hidden, Tom suggested. My thoughts exactly. Porter leaned back. My father was on the force here in 62. Never talked about it, but he kept his own case files. After he died, I found notes, references to something called the Circle. Tom placed Mai Chen's diary on the desk. I think you should read this. As Porter began examining the diary, his office phone rang. The detective's expression darkened as he listened. When? A pause. Secure the scene. I'm on my way. He hung up and turned to Tom. Someone broke into the library's archive room last night. Every record from 1962 has been destroyed. And Sarah Chen, Tom's heart stopped. She's alive. But her office was completely ransacked. They took everything except... Porter held up a single photograph that had fallen behind her desk. It showed the Morrison estate's garden, circa 1962. In the background, partially visible, was what appeared to be a freshly disturbed patch of earth near the northeast fence. They're getting nervous, Porter said quietly, which means we're looking in the right direction. He gathered the diary and photographs. Meet me tonight, 8 o'clock. Mason's diner closed last year, but Mary still lives above it. She's been waiting 60 years to tell someone what she saw that summer. As Tom left the station, he noticed George Whitaker watching from his parked car across the street. The mayor held up his right hand in a casual wave, the signet ring gleaming like a warning. Behind him, dark clouds gathered over the Morrison estate, promising a storm. Tom thought of Sarah, of the ransacked office, of all the people who had tried to uncover this truth before him. The weight of 60 years of secrets pressed down like the approaching rain. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. I'm okay, but they took my grandmother's album. All except one photo I kept at home. You need to see it, tonight." Thunder rolled across Millhaven, and Tom realized there would be no turning back now. Whatever lay buried in the Morrison estate's past, it was finally clawing its way to the surface. Rain hammered against the windows of Mary Mason's apartment above the old diner, but the thunder couldn't quite mask the tremor in her voice. "I kept this hidden all these years," she said, spreading out a yellowed garden map of the Morrison estate on her kitchen table. Eleanor drew it herself. Tom and Detective Porter leaned in, studying the careful annotations. The map showed the estate's grounds as they existed in 1962, with one crucial difference from the current layout: a small structure marked near the northeast fence that no longer appeared on modern surveys. "A greenhouse," Mary explained. "But not for plants. Eleanor used it as her private studio. She was an artist." She pulled out a creased envelope, removing several small sketches. These were her last works. The drawings showed the same scene from multiple angles: the greenhouse interior, with special attention paid to a peculiar pattern in the floor tiles. In the margin of one sketch, Eleanor had written coordinates and a single word: beneath. Porter picked up one of the sketches. The greenhouse was demolished in 63, foundation filled in. "Yes," Mary nodded. "Right after—" She stopped, her hands clutching her coffee cup. "Right after everything changed." A sharp crack of thunder made them all jump. Through the rain-streaked window, Tom caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows. "Across the street." "Tell us what happened that night, Mary," Porter urged gently. "I was 16, working late at the diner." "This diner." Mary's eyes grew distant. "Eleanor came in around midnight. She was terrified. Said she had proof of something, documents that would expose everything. She hid them in that brass box of hers. Said she was going to take it to the state police in the morning. But she never made it," Tom said quietly. Mary shook her head. "An hour later I heard shouting from the estate, saw car lights through the trees. The next day they said she'd run away to New York, but her car was still in the garage. And the greenhouse—" She swallowed hard. "They tore it down so fast, poured concrete over everything." "Why didn't you tell anyone?" Porter asked. "Because of what happened to Jimmy Walsh." Mary's voice dropped to a whisper. "He was Eleanor's friend." Started asking questions. 2 days later they found his body in the river. "Tragic accident," they called it. A floorboard creaked behind them. Tom spun around to find Sarah Chen in the doorway, soaking wet from the rain. "Sorry I'm late," she said, clutching a photograph. "Had to make sure I wasn't followed." She placed the photo on the table. "This was in my grandmother's personal effects. She took it the day after Eleanor disappeared." The image showed the greenhouse in the pale light of dawn. Through its glass walls, they could make out several figures moving inside. One of them was clearly George Whitaker, 60 years younger, but wearing the same signet ring. And there, partially visible through the rain-streaked glass, was something on the floor, a dark stain that could have been water, or something else entirely. "There's more," Sarah said. "I found my grandmother's old key ring. This was on it." She held up a small brass key. Tom's heart jumped. It matched the one from the box perfectly. A car door slammed outside. Porter moved to the window, then quickly stepped back. "We've got company. 2 cars just pulled up." "The back stairs," Mary said urgently, "through the old kitchen." They grabbed the evidence, but before they could move, footsteps thundered up. The front stairs. The apartment door burst open, revealing Diana Chen and 2 men Tom didn't recognize. "Sarah," Diana's voice was ice, "you're disappointing me. And your grandmother." "My grandmother lived with guilt for 60 years because of people like you," Sarah shot back. One of the men moved forward, but Porter's badge stopped him. "This is a police matter now." "Is it?" Diana smiled. "George Whitaker just signed an order. Suspending you from duty, detective, pending investigation into evidence tampering." The second man drew a gun. "Now let's talk about that box you found, Mr. Barrett." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Mary Mason, quiet Mary, who had served coffee and kept secrets for 60 years, suddenly swung her cast-iron skillet with surprising strength. It connected with the gunman's head with a dull clang. "Run!" she screamed. They bolted for the back stairs, the sound of pursuit close behind. As they emerged into the rainy night, a gunshot cracked through the darkness. Tom felt something hot graze his arm, but adrenaline kept him moving. They split up in the alley, Sarah and Porter going one way, Tom another. As he ran through Millhaven's rain-slicked streets, the brass key bounced against his chest, where he'd hung it on a cord. Somewhere in the darkness, Eleanor Morrison's last secret waited to be uncovered. But first, he had to survive the night. The safe house turned out to be a small cottage on the outskirts of Millhaven, where Margaret Walsh, Jimmy Walsh's widow, had lived alone for the past 6 decades. She opened the door before Porter could knock, ushering them quickly inside. "I've been waiting for someone to finally ask the right questions," she said, leading them into a cluttered sitting room. Margaret moved with the careful precision of age, but her eyes were sharp as she studied their rain-soaked figures. "Mary called, said you found Eleanor's box." Tom nursed his injured arm, while Sarah helped Margaret retrieve a wooden case from beneath a loose floorboard. Inside lay a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. "Love letters," Margaret explained, "between Eleanor and Jimmy. But they reveal much more than a secret romance." Her hands trembled as she untied the ribbon. "They tell the real story of what the Circle was doing at the Morrison estate." The letters, written in Eleanor's flowing hand, painted a disturbing picture. What had started as innocent correspondence between childhood friends had evolved into something darker as Eleanor began documenting suspicious meetings at the estate. "Jimmy was the estate's groundskeeper," Margaret continued. "He started noticing things. Large deliveries at odd hours, strange chemicals being stored in the greenhouse, people coming and going who weren't from Millhaven." Sarah spread the letters across the coffee table, translating dates and events into a timeline. "This matches entries in my grandmother's diary. She wrote about unusual sounds from the greenhouse at night, equipment being moved. The Morrison family had old money," Porter added, "but they were nearly bankrupt by 1960. Then suddenly they had enough cash to buy half the village." Margaret nodded grimly. "The greenhouse was a front. The Circle was using it for something else, manufacturing something illegal. When Eleanor discovered what they were doing, she threatened to expose them. And Jimmy tried to help her." Tom said softly, "Yes." Margaret's voice cracked. "He promised to meet her that night, help her get the evidence to the state police. Instead, she pulled out one final letter, unopened. This arrived a week after they found his body. Eleanor's handwriting, but the postmark was local, not New York." Porter carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, water-stained and creased. "Dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, something has gone wrong. The greenhouse isn't what they claim. It's worse than we imagined. There are records in the box, proof of everything. But there's more, something in the foundation. God forgive me, I should have spoken sooner. Keep these letters safe. Someday someone will need to know the truth. With love and regret, Eleanor." "She never made it to New York," Margaret said quietly. And a week later, they filled in the greenhouse. Foundation with concrete, said it was for structural reasons. A sudden noise outside made them all freeze. Through the window, they could see headlights approaching along the narrow road. "The back door," Margaret said urgently. "Through the garden, there's a path to the old railroad tracks." She pressed the letters into Sarah's hands. "Take them. It's time someone knew the whole truth." As they hurried through the overgrown garden, Tom heard the sound of car doors slamming, followed by Margaret's voice, clear and strong. "Well, George Whitaker, a bit late for a social call, isn't it?" They ran through the darkness, the letters secured in Sarah's waterproof bag. Behind them, raised voices carried on the wind, but Margaret Walsh's final words rang in Tom's ears. The whole truth. What else lay buried in the greenhouse foundation? What secret was worth killing to protect for 60 years? The brass key felt heavier than ever against his chest as they disappeared into the night, one step ahead of the past that was finally catching up to them all. The Millhaven Village Council meeting was already underway when Tom slipped into the back of the crowded chamber. Despite the late hour, the room was packed. Word had spread quickly about the disturbance at the Morrison estate. He spotted Sarah in the press section, notebook in hand, her press credentials prominently displayed. Mayor George Whitaker stood at the podium, his signet ring catching the fluorescent light as he gestured. The development of the Morrison property represents a crucial step forward for our community, he was saying. We cannot allow vandals and conspiracy theorists to delay progress. Tom noticed how Whitaker's eyes flickered briefly to the empty seat where Detective Porter usually sat during council meetings. The suspension had made the local paper that morning, along with vague allegations of misconduct. From her seat on the council, Diana Chen nodded in agreement with the mayor. Meridian Holdings has expressed serious concerns about security at the site. Perhaps we should consider expediting the demolition schedule. A murmur ran through the crowd. The original plan had called for months of historical review before any structural changes could begin. That's when Tom stood up. I'd like to address the council regarding the Morrison estate fence repair. Whitaker's practiced smile didn't waver. Mr. Barrett, while we appreciate your work as a contractor, this isn't really the appropriate. I have here, Tom continued, pulling out a weathered document, the original property survey from 1962, showing a greenhouse structure that was demolished without proper permits. He began passing copies through the crowd. And council minutes from that same year, documenting unusual chemical deliveries to that greenhouse. The murmuring grew louder. Diana Chen's smile had frozen in place. Mr. Barrett, she said sharply, those records were destroyed in the recent library break-in. How exactly did you obtain from me? Margaret Walsh stood up slowly from her seat near the door. I kept copies, just like I kept copies of these. She held up a stack of papers, the love letters. In the sudden silence, her voice carried clearly, letters between my late husband Jimmy Walsh and Eleanor Morrison, detailing exactly what the circle was doing in that greenhouse. Whitaker's facade cracked slightly. Mrs. Walsh, these are serious allegations. They're not allegations, George. Margaret's voice was steel. They're confessions. Eleanor wasn't the only one who documented what was happening. My Jimmy kept records too, about the drugs you were manufacturing, about the money laundering through shell companies, about what really happened that night. The room erupted in chaos. Sarah was scribbling furiously in her notebook. Council members were whispering urgently to each other, and through it all, Tom watched as something shifted in the room. Decades of quiet suspicion suddenly finding voice. I remember those deliveries. An elderly man called out. Always at night, never logged in the official records. My father worked security at the estate, another voice added. Came home sick some nights. Said it was from chemicals they were storing. Diana Chen stood abruptly. This meeting is adjourned. No! The voice came from the back of the room. Detective Porter walked in, followed by 2 state police officers. This meeting is evidence in an ongoing investigation. He held up a warrant. We've been building this case for months. Mrs. Walsh's documents were the final piece we needed. The state police are very interested in both the historical crimes and the recent attempts to cover them up. Whitaker's composure finally shattered. You don't understand, he snarled. We saved this town. The money we made, it kept Millhaven alive when the factories were closing. Everything we did was for the greater good. Was Eleanor Morrison's death for the greater good? Tom asked quietly. The room fell silent. What did you say? Whitaker's voice was dangerous. We found her, George. Porter's words cut through the tension. Ground-penetrating radar of the Greenhouse Foundation. We know what's buried there. Whitaker looked around the room wildly, seeing 60 years of carefully maintained power crumbling. His hand went to his jacket pocket. "Don't," Porter said softly. But Whitaker was beyond hearing. The gunshot echoed through the council chamber. Someone screamed, but Whitaker's aim was off. The bullet splintered the podium as Tom tackled him to the ground. The signet ring went flying, skittering across the floor to land at Sarah's feet. As the state police moved in, Tom caught Sarah's eye across the chaos. She nodded slightly, holding up her notebook. The truth would finally be told. Outside, a light. Rain began to fall on Mill Haven, washing away the secrets of 60 years, one drop at a time. In the aftermath of the council meeting, Porter's office at the state police barracks became a war room of evidence. Photos and documents covered every surface, connected by red strings that traced 60 years of deception. Tom and Sarah sat across from his desk, while Margaret Walsh occupied the room's only comfortable chair. "It wasn't just Eleanor and Jimmy," Porter said, pulling out a thick police file. "Once we knew what to look for, a pattern emerged. 7 disappearances between 1962 and 1975, all connected to the Morrison estate in some way." He spread out a series of photographs, young faces frozen in time. Michael Chen, Sarah's uncle, vanished in '65 after applying for a gardening job. Lisa Thompson, a journalist investigating property values in '68. David Martinez, a state environmental inspector in '72. Sarah's hand trembled as she touched her uncle's photo. "My grandmother never talked about him, because Diana Chen made sure she understood the consequences," Margaret added softly. "Just like they did with all the families. Threats wrapped in promises. Protection in exchange for silence." Porter nodded grimly. The circle had a system. When someone got too close, they'd vanish, always explained away. Moved to another city, tragic accident, run away. The families would suddenly receive money, job offers, opportunities to relocate. Those who stayed, like Margaret, "We learned to live with the guilt," Margaret finished. "To smile at church suppers and pretend we didn't know what lay beneath that greenhouse floor." Tom studied the crime scene photos from the council meeting. But why maintain the property? Why not just sell it and be done? Because of this, Porter pulled out an old blueprint of the greenhouse. The foundation wasn't just poured concrete, it was engineered with a series of hollow chambers, perfect for storing things you didn't want found. "The drugs they manufactured?" Sarah asked. "Some of it, but also records, insurance." Porter's expression was grim. The circle didn't trust each other. Each member kept evidence of the other's crimes. As long as everyone stayed quiet, everyone was protected. He turned to a map of property transfers. Every 10 years, they'd move the estate through a new shell company. Each transfer corresponded with a meeting of the circle. They'd verify their secrets were still secure, renew their pact of silence. "Until Meridian Holdings broke the pattern," Tom said. "Exactly. Diana Chen went rogue. Decided to take control of the property herself, cash in on development deals." Porter smiled thinly. She didn't count on a handyman finding Eleanor's box during a fence repair. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young officer entered with a file. "Lab results from the ground-penetrating radar, sir. They've found 8 distinct anomalies in the foundation." "8 bodies," Margaret whispered. "9, actually." Porter opened the file. "Eleanor Morrison was pregnant when she died. About 4 months along." He looked at Tom. "That's why the greenhouse had to go. Too many witnesses, too many loose ends." Sarah was reviewing her notes. The love letters mentioned a ledger. Eleanor wrote that the circle kept detailed records of their operation, which would still be in one of those foundation chambers, Tom realized, along with 60 years of evidence. "If we can find it." Porter spread out Eleanor's sketches of the greenhouse floor. "These tile patterns she drew, they're not decorative, they're a key, coordinates." Margaret leaned forward. "The night Eleanor died, she told Jimmy she'd hidden something in plain sight. Art concealing truth, she called it. They studied the drawings together. The tile pattern did seem to form a kind of map, with one section marked by a subtle variation in the design. There, Tom pointed. That's where the brass key would fit, a hidden access panel. Porter's phone buzzed. His expression darkened as he read the message. Diana Chen was just found dead in her holding cell. Apparent suicide. Apparent? Sarah asked. Let's just say the circle takes care of its loose ends. Porter gathered the files. We need to move fast. Demolition crews are scheduled to start at the Morrison estate tomorrow morning. More like tonight, Tom said, checking his own phone. My contact at the construction company just warned me. They've moved up the schedule. Crews are heading there now. They looked at each other, understanding the stakes. Somewhere beneath the greenhouse foundation lay the truth about 8 murders, decades of corruption, and the dark secret at the heart of Millhaven. And they had only hours to uncover it before the circle erased the evidence forever. I'll get a warrant, Porter said, reaching for his phone. No time, Margaret replied, her voice steady. Sometimes justice can't wait for paperwork. She pulled out a ring of old keys. I was estate manager after Jimmy died. Kept every key, just in case, including one to the back gate. Sarah grabbed her coat. I'm coming too. Tom felt the weight of Eleanor's brass key against his chest. Then let's finish what she started. As they headed out into the night, thunder rolled across. Millhaven, the storm that had been building for 60 years, was finally breaking. The rain had intensified by the time they reached the Morrison estate, turning the old gravel drive into a muddy path. As Margaret led them around to the back gate, Sarah pulled out a folded paper from her bag, a family tree she'd been constructing, connecting Millhaven's prominent families to the circle. Look at this pattern, she said, holding the paper under the beam of Porter's flashlight. Every founding member of the circle had children who married into other circle families, the Whitakers, the Morrisons, the Chens, keeping power within the bloodlines, Porter noted, making sure everyone had a stake in maintaining silence. Tom studied the complex web of relationships. That's why Diana went rogue. She was the first outsider to gain real control. Not quite. Margaret's hands shook slightly as she worked the old key into the gate's lock. There was one other. Eleanor Morrison's baby would have been the first cross-circle child, a Whitaker Morrison. Heir. The gate creaked open, revealing the overgrown path to the greenhouse foundation. Sarah consulted her grandmother's diary. That's why my grandmother helped them. They threatened my Uncle Michael when he discovered the pregnancy. Said they'd do the same to my father if she didn't cooperate. They moved carefully through the wet grass, following the beam of Porter's flashlight. The foundation lay ahead, a dark rectangle against the darker ground. Construction equipment loomed nearby, waiting for morning. The circles used family as both weapon and shield, Margaret continued. After Jimmy died, they offered to put our son through college, said it would be what Jimmy wanted. Her voice hardened. Blood money, paid with my husband's life. Porter's. Light caught something in the mud, a fresh tire track. We're not alone. As if in answer, floodlights suddenly blazed to life around the foundation. A figure stepped out from behind the construction equipment, Robert Whitaker, the mayor's son, holding what looked like military-grade explosives. I wondered who'd figure it out first, he said conversationally. The tile pattern was clever. Aunt Eleanor always did have an artist's eye for detail. Sarah's breath caught. Aunt Eleanor? Oh, yes. Robert smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. My father's secret sister. The family tree has some interesting branches, doesn't it? Mother never knew, of course. Just thought Dad was particularly devoted to his corporate interests. He gestured to the foundation. Unfortunately, those interests require some immediate urban renewal. In about 30 minutes, this entire area will be reduced to rubble. Anything buried here will be far too damaged to reconstruct. There are bodies down there, Tom said. Evidence of murders. Necessary sacrifices for the greater good. Robert's voice was eerily calm. The circle kept Millhaven alive when every other small town was dying. The drugs paid for schools, hospitals, infrastructure. Progress requires difficult choices. Like killing your own aunt? Sarah's voice shook. Your own blood? Something flickered in Robert's expression. Eleanor made her choice. She would have destroyed everything our families built. Just like Diana chose her own ambition over tradition. He checked his watch. You should leave now, for old times. Okay, I'll give you 5 minutes, Robert. Margaret stepped forward. I knew your father when he was younger than you are now, before the circle corrupted him. You don't have to continue this. Actually, I do. He pulled out a phone, showing them the screen. On it, they could see live video of the state police barracks and the explosives planted around its foundation. Insurance, as you said. The circle protects its own. But as he spoke, Tom noticed something, a subtle shift in the shadows behind Robert. A figure moving silently through the rain. Eleanor wasn't the only one who kept insurance, Margaret said clearly, drawing Robert's attention. Jimmy had proof too, in a safe deposit box set to open if anything happened to me. Robert's finger tightened on the detonator. You're bluffing. Maybe. Margaret's eyes were steel. But can you risk it? 60 years of secrets exposed in one. Morning's mail? That's when Porter struck, emerging from the darkness to tackle Robert from behind. The detonator went flying, landing in the mud. Tom lunged for it as Sarah and Margaret ran for cover. Time seemed to freeze in the rain-soaked darkness. Porter kept Robert pinned, while Sarah coordinated with the state police by phone. Tom stood transfixed by the foundation's surface, where 60 years of secrets waited behind a keyhole. That's when Margaret spoke, her voice carrying over the storm. There's something you need to hear first. She pulled out an old tape recorder. Frank Morrison's last confession. I recorded it the night he died 3 months ago. Robert stopped, struggling. Uncle Frank? He never spoke about... He spoke at the end. Margaret pressed play. Through the crackle of the ancient tape, a wheezing voice emerged. I need to set it right. What we did to Eleanor. My own daughter. She found the ledger. Saw what we were becoming. The drugs were supposed to be temporary, just to save the town during the recession. But power, it changes you. A fit of coughing interrupted the confession. When the voice returned, it was weaker. George Whitaker was the father of her baby. Said he'd leave his wife, help her expose everything, but he lied. When she threatened to go public, he called the circle. We met in the greenhouse. I thought they'd just scare her. Sarah's hand found Tom's in the darkness as the dying man continued. She fought back. There was a struggle. The ledger fell into a pile of chemicals. When it was over, my girl was gone, my Eleanor. We buried her there under the foundation, modified the greenhouse plans to create hidden chambers. Other bodies followed. Each time, we told ourselves it was necessary for the greater good. Robert had gone very still, listening to his great-uncle's voice. But Eleanor, she was clever. She knew she might not survive. Left a trail of breadcrumbs. The box in the fence. The tile pattern. A key to access the chambers, all leading to proof that would destroy the circle. Whitaker thinks it was all destroyed that night. He's wrong. Thunder rolled as Frank Morrison's final words played out. The original ledger survived. Eleanor had made a copy. It's still there in the foundation. Names, dates, accounts, everything. My daughter's last gift to the truth. God forgive us. God forgive me. The tape clicked off. In the silence that followed, they could hear sirens in the distance. The barracks has been evacuated, Sarah reported quietly. Bomb squad is en route. Robert laughed bitterly. You still don't understand. There are contingencies for the contingencies, people in place. The circle is bigger than... No. Margaret's voice cut through his protests. The circle ends tonight. For Jimmy, for Eleanor, for all of them. Tom moved toward the foundation, the brass key heavy in his hand. Sarah's flashlight beam caught the subtle indentation in the concrete, a keyhole disguised within Eleanor's tile pattern. Robert, Porter said firmly, the override code. Now, you'll have to kill me. Actually, A new voice called out. "I can help with that." They turned to see Mary Mason emerging from the shadows, holding a familiar phone. "Swipe this during the fight. Turns out the override code is his mother's birthday." Not very original. Robert lunged against Porter's grip. "How did you—" "I've served breakfast to 3 generations of Whitakers," Mary said calmly, typing in the code. "You really should be more careful what you say in front of waitresses. We see everything, remember everything." The phone chimed, confirming the override. Robert slumped in defeat. Tom knelt by the keyhole as Porter handcuffed Robert. The brass key slid in perfectly, a soft click echoing through the rain. Somewhere beneath their feet, mechanisms long dormant began to move. Sarah held up her grandmother's diary. Eleanor's last entry. She wrote that the truth has a way of rising to the surface no matter how deep you bury it. As if in answer, a section of the foundation began to shift, revealing a narrow passage into the earth. From somewhere below came the musty breath of secrets too long hidden. Tom took Sarah's hand. "Ready?" She nodded, and together they descended into the dark heart of Millhaven's past, where Eleanor Morrison's final testimony waited to be heard. Time seemed to freeze in the rain-soaked darkness. Porter kept Robert pinned, while Sarah coordinated with the state police by phone. Tom stood transfixed by the foundation's surface, where 60 years of secrets waited behind a keyhole. That's when Margaret spoke, her voice carrying over the storm. "There's something you need to hear first." She pulled out an old tape recorder. "Frank Morrison's last confession. I recorded it the night he died 3 months ago." Robert stopped, struggling. "Uncle Frank? He never spoke about—" "He spoke at the end." Margaret pressed play. Through the crackle of the ancient tape, a wheezing voice emerged. "I need to set it right. What we did to Eleanor. My own daughter. She found the ledger, saw what we were becoming. The drugs were supposed to be temporary, just to save the town during the recession. But power, it changes you." A fit of coughing interrupted the confession. When the voice returned, it was weaker. George Whitaker was the father of her baby. Said he'd leave his wife, help her expose everything, but he lied. When she threatened to go public, he called the circle. We met in the greenhouse. I thought they'd just scare her. Sarah's hand found Tom's in the darkness as the dying man continued. She fought back. There was a struggle. The ledger fell into a pile of chemicals. When it was over, my girl was gone, my Eleanor. We buried her there under the foundation, modified the greenhouse plans to create hidden chambers. Other bodies followed. Each time, we told ourselves it was necessary for the greater good. Robert had gone very still, listening to his great-uncle's voice. But Eleanor, she was clever. She knew she might not survive. Left a trail of breadcrumbs. The box in the fence. The tile pattern. A key to access the chambers, all leading to proof that would destroy the circle. Whitaker thinks it was all destroyed that night. He's wrong. Thunder rolled as Frank Morrison's final words played out. The original ledger survived. Eleanor had made a copy. It's still there in the foundation. Names, dates, accounts, everything. My daughter's last gift to the truth. God forgive us. God forgive me. The tape clicked off. In the silence that followed, they could hear sirens in the distance. "The barracks has been evacuated," Sarah reported quietly. "Bomb squad is en route." Robert laughed bitterly. "You still don't understand. There are contingencies for the contingencies, people in place. The circle is bigger than—" "No." Margaret's voice cut through his protests. "The circle ends tonight. For Jimmy, for Eleanor, for all of them." Tom moved toward the foundation, the brass key heavy in his hand. Sarah's flashlight beam caught the subtle indentation in the concrete, a keyhole disguised within Eleanor's tile pattern. "Robert," Porter said firmly, "the override code. Now. You'll have to kill me." "Actually," a new voice called out, "I can help with that." They turned to see Mary Mason emerging from the shadows, holding a familiar phone. "Swipe this during the fight. Turns out the override code is his mother's birthday." Not very original. Robert lunged against Porter's grip. "How did you—" "I've served breakfast to 3 generations of Whitakers," Mary said calmly, typing in the code. "You really should be more careful what you say in front of waitresses. We see everything, remember everything." The phone chimed, confirming the override. Robert slumped in defeat. Tom knelt by the keyhole as Porter handcuffed Robert. The brass key slid in perfectly, a soft click echoing through the rain. Somewhere beneath their feet, mechanisms long dormant began to move. Sarah held up her grandmother's diary. Eleanor's last entry. She wrote that the truth has a way of rising to the surface no matter how deep you bury it. As if in answer, a section of the foundation began to shift, revealing a narrow passage into the earth. From somewhere below came the musty breath of secrets too long hidden. Tom took Sarah's hand. "Ready?" She nodded, and together they descended into the dark heart of Millhaven's past, where Eleanor Morrison's final testimony waited to be heard. The passage beneath the foundation was narrow, forcing them to descend single file. Tom led the way, with Sarah close behind, their flashlight beams revealing decades-old concrete walls. The air grew thicker with each step, heavy with the weight of buried secrets. "Stop!" Robert's voice echoed from above. Despite his handcuffs, he'd managed to break free from Porter's grip. "You have no idea what you're walking into. The chamber's booby-trapped." Tom froze, one foot hovering above the next step. Sarah's breath caught behind him. "He's bluffing," Mary called down. "Frank's confession mentioned nothing about a gunshot cracked through the night." Porter's warning shout was followed by the sound of a struggle. More footsteps approached from above, heavy, purposeful steps. "Mr. Barrett." George Whitaker's voice drifted down, eerily calm for a man who'd fled police custody. "I believe you. Have something that belongs to me." Sarah gripped Tom's arm. "How many of them are up there?" Before he could answer, a series of threatening letters fluttered down the passage, landing at their feet. Each bore the same message. "Final warning. The circle sees all." "You should read those," Whitaker called down. "They're from our friends, in high places, judges, politicians, police chiefs. The circle's influence extends far beyond Millhaven." Tom picked up one of the letters, recognizing the official letterhead of the state Supreme Court. The implications were staggering. "Eleanor knew," Sarah whispered. "That's why she hid everything here. Local police couldn't be trusted." More footsteps above, Porter's voice tight with tension. "State police are 10 minutes out. They won't make it in time." Whitaker's tone was almost conversational. "In 5 minutes, this entire foundation will collapse. Modern demolition techniques are so efficient." A new sound reached them, the beeping of explosive charges being armed. "Last chance," Whitaker announced. "Come up now, surrender the key and everything you've found. We'll even let you leave town quietly. With generous compensation, of course." Tom felt the weight of the brass key against his chest. 60 years of violence and corruption, all hanging on this moment. He reached for it. "Don't you dare!" Sarah's voice was steel. "My grandmother didn't carry this guilt for 60 years just to have us give up now." She was right, but the passage ahead disappeared into darkness, and armed members of the circle waited above. They were trapped. That's when Tom noticed something about the walls, regular indentations, almost invisible unless you knew to look for them. A handyman's instinct kicked in. "These aren't just walls," he whispered. "They're panels. Part of Eleanor's design." Sarah quickly consulted her grandmother's diary. "Wait, there's a note here. The way through is the way around. It hides truth, but truth leaves traces." Tom ran his hands along the wall, feeling for any subtle difference in the concrete. There, a section that rang just slightly hollow when tapped. The beeping of the charges accelerated above. 3 minutes, Mr. Barrett." Whitaker's voice had lost its calm edge. "Don't die for Eleanor's crusade. She's been dead 60 years. But Tom had found what he was looking for, a hidden catch disguised as a structural flaw. The panels swung silently inward, revealing a second passage. She built a bypass, Sarah breathed. A secret way to the chamber, more footsteps above, more voices. The circle was mobilizing its full force. 1 minute, Whitaker shouted. The charges are armed. Tom met Sarah's eyes in the darkness. No words were needed. They slipped through the hidden door just as the first explosions rocked the foundation. The main passage collapsed behind them, but Eleanor's secret route held firm. They ran through the darkness, following the bypass tunnel as concrete dust rained down. Ahead, something glinted in their flashlight beams. A metal door marked with a familiar circle and line symbol. The chamber waited. And beyond it, if they survived, lay the evidence that would break the circle's power forever. Above them, Millhaven trembled with the sound of approaching sirens and distant explosions. The storm that had been building for 60 years was about to break. The metal door's hinges groaned as Tom turned Eleanor's key in the lock. Beyond lay a chamber that seemed frozen in time, a perfectly preserved slice of 1962 sealed away from the world. Their flashlight beams revealed walls lined with filing. In cabinets, chemical storage tanks, and a large drafting table at the center. Eleanor's studio, Sarah whispered, running her fingers over the dusty surface. She used art to hide her real work. The drafting table held architectural plans, the original blueprints for the greenhouse and its foundation. But these weren't the official versions. These showed the hidden chambers, the secret passages, every detail the circle had tried to. Barry, look at this. Tom pointed to a note in the margin, written in Eleanor's hand. The load-bearing walls tell the true story. Sarah was already examining the filing cabinets. These are organized by family name. Whitaker, Morrison, Chen. Decades of evidence. She pulled out a thick folder. Financial records, pharmaceutical formulas, shipping manifests. They weren't just making drugs, they were building an empire. A distant explosion shook dust from the ceiling. The circle was still trying to collapse the foundation. Here, Tom had found something behind the drafting table, an old camera, carefully wrapped and preserved. The final proof. The camera's film had never been developed, protected in its light-proof case for 60 years. But next to it lay a contact sheet of prints, the last images Eleanor had captured. Crime scene photos, though she hadn't lived to call them that. The images told the story in brutal clarity. The circle's midnight meetings, cash changing hands, chemicals being mixed, and most damning, George Whitaker and the others standing over Eleanor's body, preparing to bury their crime beneath the greenhouse floor. She knew they were coming for her, Sarah said softly. This whole chamber, it's not just evidence, it's her testimony. But it was what they found next that made their blood run cold. Behind a false wall panel, revealed by another subtle pressure point, lay a small room. Inside were 8 filing boxes, each labeled with a name, the names of the missing. Medical records, Sarah read, opening the first box. Chemical exposure reports. These people, they weren't just murdered, they were test subjects. Tom picked up a leather-bound journal, Eleanor's private diary. The final entry was dated the night she died. If you're reading this, I didn't survive. To tell the truth myself. But the Circle's secrets are all here. The drugs they tested on innocent people, the money that bought their power, the lives they destroyed to protect their empire. To whoever finds this place, I've given you the key, but the choice of what to do with it is yours. Remember that truth, like art, endures. Even buried, it waits to be discovered. And to my unborn child, I'm sorry I won't be there to see you grow up. Know that your mother died trying to break the cycle of secrets that has poisoned this town for too long. Love, Eleanor. Another explosion rocked the chamber. Closer this time. They're getting through, Tom warned. Sarah was rapidly photographing documents with her phone. We need to get this to Porter, to the state police. But as they turned to leave, they found they weren't alone. Robert Whittaker stood in the doorway, bleeding from a head wound but holding a gun steady. "My father was right about one thing," he said quietly. "The circle protects its own, even from themselves." "She was your aunt," Sarah pleaded. "Your own blood, which is why this has to end here." He raised the gun. "The truth doesn't set anyone free. It just destroys everything we built." "You mean everything you stole," Tom corrected. "Everything you killed for progress, for the future." Robert's voice cracked slightly. "You've seen the evidence, how far the circle's influence reaches. Do you really think any of this will see the light of day?" Another explosion, much closer. Dust and concrete fragments rained down. "You don't have to make the same choice they did," Tom said. "Eleanor gave us all a chance to choose differently." For a moment, something flickered in Robert's eyes. Doubt, perhaps, or recognition. The gun wavered, then the ceiling caved in. The chamber filled with choking dust as concrete rained down. In the chaos, Tom tackled Sarah clear of falling debris while Robert stumbled backward, his gun discharging harmlessly into the wall. Through the new hole in the ceiling they could hear shouting and the wail of approaching sirens. The evidence. Sarah scrambled toward the filing cabinets, but Tom pulled her back just as another section of ceiling collapsed. "There's no time," but Robert was already moving, reaching for Eleanor's camera and diary. For a moment, their eyes met through the swirling dust. Then he thrust the items toward them. "Northwest corner," he shouted over the rumble of collapsing concrete. "There's a maintenance tunnel. It leads to the old storm drain system." "Why are you—" Sarah began. "Because Eleanor was right," Robert's voice cracked, "and I'm tired of carrying my father's sins." As if summoned by his words, George Whittaker's voice boomed down through the hole in the ceiling. "Robert, don't you dare betray us!" Robert's response was to grab one of the file boxes, the one marked with Eleanor's name, and shove it into Tom's arms. "Go! I'll hold them off!" They hesitated for a split second, but the decision was made for them as more of the ceiling gave way. Tom and Sarah ran for the northwest corner, finding the access panel Robert had mentioned. Behind them, they heard Robert's voice one last time. "Hey, Dad, Eleanor says hello." A gunshot echoed through the chamber, followed by a scream of rage from above. The maintenance tunnel was narrow and slick with decades of seepage, but they moved as fast as they dared, Eleanor's box clutched between them. They could hear the collapse continuing behind them, and ahead the growing sound of flowing water. They emerged into the storm drain just as emergency vehicles' lights began painting the night in red and blue. Porter was waiting with a state police tactical team. "The others?" he asked. Tom shook his head. "The chamber's Robert." "We've got George Whittaker in custody," Porter reported. "Tried to run when the state police arrived, but he's not talking. He doesn't have to." Sarah held up Eleanor's camera and diary. "She left us everything we need." As if to underscore her words, a final rumble shook the ground. The Morrison Estates Foundation had completely collapsed, taking its 60 years of secrets with it. But the most important evidence had survived. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of activity. State police forensics teams swarmed the site, recovering what they could from the rubble. Robert's body was found in the chamber, a bullet in his chest. Whether from his own gun or his father's remained unclear. The contents of Eleanor's box proved even more damning than they'd imagined. Beyond the evidence of drug manufacturing and murder, her documentation revealed a network of corruption that reached the highest levels of state government. The Circle's influence had spread far beyond Millhaven's borders. The Justice Department files arrived by morning, search warrants, indictments, arrests spanning 3 counties. George Whittaker watched from his holding cell as his empire crumbled, his only comment a bitter laugh when they showed him Eleanor's final photographs. "You still don't understand," he told Porter during questioning. "Everything we did made this town what it is. The drugs paid for your precious police station. The cover-ups kept order. We were the foundation this place was built on." "No," Porter replied, sliding Eleanor's diary across the table. You were the rot at its heart, and now everyone will know. Sarah found Tom at the collapsed foundation later that day. He was standing where the greenhouse had once been, holding the brass key that had started everything. My grandmother would be proud, she said softly, of all of us. Eleanor too, Tom added. She gave us the chance to make it right. As they stood there, other villagers began arriving. Mary Mason, Margaret Walsh, former employees of the estate, family members of the missing. Each carried something to lay at the site. Flowers, photographs, memories long suppressed. This is how we rebuild, Sarah realized, not with secrets, but with truth. A gentle rain began to fall, washing away decades of dust. Somewhere beneath the rubble lay the remains of those who had died for the circle's power. But above, Millhaven was awakening to a new dawn, one where the darkest chapter of its history could finally be brought into the light. The headlines broke like waves across the state. Millhaven conspiracy exposed. 60-year cover-up revealed. The circle of corruption. News vans lined the village streets, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers. But the real stories were happening in the quiet spaces between the headlines. Tom found Sarah in the library's archive room, surrounded by boxes of newly discovered documents. The state police had unsealed records from dozens of agencies, and the true scope of the circle's influence was still unfolding. Look at this, she said, holding up a stack of papers. Purchase orders for chemical supplies, all routed through shell companies. The greenhouse operation was just the beginning. They had facilities in 3 other counties. How many people were involved? At least 30 high-level conspirators across the state. Judges, police chiefs, business leaders. She rubbed her tired eyes. They're still making arrests. The library had become a de facto truth and reconciliation center. Every day, more villagers came forward with stories, evidence, memories they'd kept buried. Mary Mason had set up a collection point for photographs and documents, creating a living history of the circle's impact. Mr. Barrett, a young woman, approached holding a faded photograph. I'm Lisa Thompson's daughter, the journalist who disappeared in '68. They told us she'd moved to California, started a new life, but she never contacted us, never. She swallowed hard. I'd like to add her story to the archive. These moments happen dozens of times a day now, the weight of 60 years of secrets, lifting one confession, one revelation at a time. Porter coordinated with federal authorities from his office, now cleared of the corruption charges that had temporarily suspended him. The Justice Department is calling it one of the largest organized crime operations ever uncovered in a small town, he told them during their daily briefing. The drug manufacturing alone, we're talking hundreds of millions in today's money. But money was only part of the story. Eleanor's documentation had revealed the human cost. 8 confirmed murders, dozens of suspicious deaths, countless lives destroyed by the circle's need for control. The Morrison estate itself became a symbol of both trauma and healing. The collapsed foundation was cordoned off as a crime scene, but people kept coming, leaving flowers and photographs. Someone planted a garden nearby, healing herbs and bright flowers pushing up through soil that had held secrets for too long. Sarah's grandmother's diary became a key piece of evidence, its pages revealing how the circle had manipulated immigrant families, using their vulnerability to enforce silence. Other families came forward with similar stories, promises made, threats delivered, generations bound by webs of obligation and fear. The ripples spread beyond Millhaven. Other towns began examining their own histories, their own power structures. The pattern the circle had created of corruption hidden behind respectability proved disturbingly common. George Whitaker's trial date was set for spring, but his influence was already being dismantled. Bank records showed decades of manipulation. Loans granted or denied based on loyalty to the circle, property values artificially controlled, careers made or broken with a single phone call. It's like watching a shadow lift, Mary Mason said one evening, as she and Tom closed up the archive room. All these years, we lived under something we couldn't quite name. Now we can face it, Tom finished, the brass key that had started. Everything now lay in an evidence locker, tagged and photographed. But its real power had been symbolic. The power to unlock not just a hidden chamber, but a community's buried truth. Sarah found Tom at the diner one morning, going through his father's old work ledger. The margin marks they'd once thought mysterious now told a clear story. Jobs where he'd noticed something wrong, places that held pieces of the puzzle. He knew, Tom said quietly. Maybe not everything, but enough to leave breadcrumbs. Like Eleanor, Sarah nodded. They all left us ways to find the truth. We just had to be ready to look. Outside, Mill Haven was changing. The old power structures were falling, but new connections were forming in their place. Truth they were. Learning could be as strong a foundation as secrets had been, and somewhere they liked to think Eleanor Morrison was smiling. 3 months after the foundation collapsed, Mill Haven gathered for a different kind of groundbreaking. Where the Morrison estate had once loomed, construction crews were preparing to build a memorial garden and community centre. The plans, fittingly, had been drawn up using Eleanor's original artistic style as inspiration. Sarah stood at the podium, addressing the crowd that had assembled despite the autumn chill. Today, we break ground not just for a building, but for a promise to future generations. The Memorial Truth Center will house the complete records of what happened here, both the Circle's crimes and the courage of those who fought to expose them. Among the audience, Tom recognized faces that had become familiar during the long summer of revelations. Lisa Thompson's daughter, clutching a newly issued death certificate that finally named her mother's true fate. Former estate workers who had carried fragments of knowledge for decades, now free to speak their full truth. Even Robert Whittaker's widow, her presence a silent testimony to the complex legacy of choice and redemption. A bronze plaque waited to be mounted, bearing names and dates, Eleanor Morrison, Jimmy Walsh, and all the others who had died protecting Mill Haven's secrets. Below them, a simple inscription: Truth rises, no matter how deep it's buried. The memorial garden will incorporate Eleanor's original tile pattern, Sarah continued. Not to hide secrets this time, but to remind us of how art and truth can work together to preserve memory. Porter, recently promoted to chief of the Reform Police Department, stood nearby with federal officials. The investigation had expanded far beyond Mill Haven, unraveling similar corruption in towns across the state. Eleanor's evidence had triggered a domino effect of revelations and reforms. After the ceremony, Tom found Mary Mason sitting on a bench near the construction site. She was holding his father's old work ledger, studying the margin marks with new understanding. Your father marked the Morrison estate job differently than the others, she noted. See, a double line instead of single. He knew something was deeply wrong here, but he couldn't prove it, Tom said, sitting beside her. No, but he taught you to pay attention, to notice things others missed, she smiled, like father, like son. The autumn wind stirred fallen leaves across the foundation's remnants. Soon, new construction would cover the last visible traces of the Circle's crimes. But the truth had already taken root in ways concrete could never contain. Sarah joined them, carrying a box of newly archived materials. The Justice Department just released more files, lists of everyone the Circle influenced or controlled. It's extensive. The price of power, Mary mused. All those people thinking they were building something permanent. They did build something permanent, Tom replied, just not what they intended. He was right. The Circle had wanted to build an empire of secrets, but instead they'd created a testament to truth's persistence. Every document they'd hidden, every lie they'd told, now served as evidence of corruption's ultimate futility. The memorial would include a research center, where scholars and journalists could study how power corrupts and how truth eventually prevails. Eleanor's artistic blueprints would be displayed alongside the evidence she'd gathered, showing how creativity and courage could work hand in hand. A group of schoolchildren passed by on a field trip, their teacher explaining the site's significance. "This is where our town chose truth over secrets," they heard her say, "where we learned that healing starts with honesty." Sarah watched them go, thinking of her grandmother's courage. This is what Eleanor wanted, isn't it? Not just justice, but understanding, a chance for future generations to learn from our mistakes. "And our corrections," Tom added. The construction crews were marking foundation lines for the new building, bright paint on soil that had held darkness for so long. Soon winter would come, but spring would follow. And when it did, flowers would bloom in Eleanor's memorial garden, their roots reaching deep into transformed earth. Mill Haven was learning that truth, like nature, follows its own cycle of death and rebirth. What the circle had tried to bury had finally flowered into something beautiful, a community founded on honesty instead of fear, on memory instead of forgetting. Winter melted into spring, and Mill Haven underwent its own kind of thaw. The village council chamber, once the circle's seat of power, now hosted open forums where residents debated the community's future. Every meeting began with a reading of the new community charter, drafted by a coalition of residents and approved by an overwhelming majority. "We acknowledge our past, both its darkness and its light. We commit to transparency, accountability, and the belief that our community grows stronger through truth rather than secrecy." Tom sat in on these meetings, watching democracy replace autocracy. The old system of hand-picked successors and backroom deals had given way to genuine elections. Sarah, to no one's surprise, had been chosen to lead the new Historical Truth Commission. "The archives keep growing," she told him one evening as they walked through the partially completed memorial garden. "People from other towns are sending us their own stories of corruption and resistance." It's like Eleanor's courage sparked something larger than Mill Haven. The village itself was changing physically. The circle's old properties were being repurposed. The Whitaker mansion would become a community arts center. The Chen family's holdings transformed into affordable housing. Each renovation seemed to breathe new life into streets long shadowed by power's weight. Porter's reformed police department operated under strict oversight, with body cameras and civilian review boards. "Transparency isn't just a word anymore," he explained during a community meeting. "It's built into every level of our operations." The most visible change was in the people themselves. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact now gathered for town halls and community events. The wall of silence that had divided generations was crumbling, replaced by an almost urgent need to connect and understand. Margaret Walsh, now heading the victims' family support group, worked to ensure that healing reached everyone touched by the circle's crimes. "We're not just acknowledging what happened," she insisted. "We're learning how to prevent it from happening again." The Memorial Truth Center took shape as spring advanced, its modern architecture incorporating elements of Eleanor's artistic vision. The main hall would house a permanent exhibition, The Price of Silence, Mill Haven's journey from secrecy to truth. But it was the building's transparent walls that made the strongest statement: no more shadows, no more hidden corners. Mason had reopened the diner, transforming it into a community gathering space where the village's new identity took shape through countless conversations. "We used to whisper here," she told Tom as she served his usual coffee. "Now listen." The buzz of open dialogue filled the room. Young parents discussed educational reforms, while elderly residents shared long-suppressed stories. Each conversation helped weave a new social fabric, stronger for being openly examined and freely chosen. Even the Morrison estate grounds were being reclaimed by nature and intention. Community gardens replaced manicured lawns, and Eleanor's beloved northeast fence had been transformed into a living wall of climbing roses. "Beauty growing from truth," Sarah called it. The village's new governance structure emphasized checks and balances with multiple layers of oversight and mandatory transparency. Regular audits and open records became the norm rather than the exception. But beyond the formal changes, something more fundamental had shifted. It's in how we see ourselves now, Tom realized during a community planning session. We're not just residents anymore. We're custodians of truth. This new identity manifested in unexpected ways. Mill Haven became known as a model for small-town reform, hosting workshops on corruption prevention and community healing. Journalists and researchers came to study how a village had transformed itself from a center of secrets to a beacon of transparency. Sarah's Historical Truth Commission partnered with universities to develop educational programs. We're teaching the next generation that power doesn't have to corrupt, she explained, that communities can choose a different path. The spring air carried the scent of new growth and possibility. Mill Haven was learning that true strength comes not from controlling truth, but from embracing it. Eleanor's legacy had evolved from a hidden box of evidence into a living philosophy of governance and community. As Tom watched another sunset paint the changing village in gold, he understood that Mill Haven's transformation was more than just structural reform. It was a fundamental reimagining of what community could mean when built on truth instead of power, on memory instead of forgetting, on hope instead of fear. 1 year to the day after finding Eleanor's box, Tom Barrett stood before the newly restored northeast fence of the Memorial Truth Center. The morning light caught the brass plaque that now marked the spot where everything had begun. Here, a simple fence repair revealed our darkest secret and set us on the path to truth. The fence itself had been preserved rather than replaced, its weathered wood telling its own story of time and transformation. Tom ran his hand along the grain, feeling the ghost of those carved words, "God forgive us all." But forgiveness, Mill Haven had learned, begins with truth. Sarah emerged from the center's main building, carrying a familiar leather-bound book. "Just finished digitizing your father's work ledger," she said. "It's amazing how many pieces of the puzzle he documented over the years. He always said a good handyman pays attention to the small details." Tom smiled. "Never knew he was teaching me investigation skills along with fence repair." They walked together through Eleanor's memorial garden, now in full bloom. The tile pattern she'd designed had been recreated in the pathways, no longer hiding secrets, but celebrating her artistry. At the center, a sculpture incorporated her original brass key, eternally pointing toward truth. Mary Mason was setting up for the day's ceremony, the formal dedication of the completed Truth Center. Porter stood nearby, helping arrange chairs, while discussing cold case investigations with Margaret Walsh. The work of justice continued, but now in the open, under the community's watchful eye. "Sometimes I wonder," Sarah said softly, "what Eleanor would think of all this. Her secret chamber became a public space, her hidden evidence now openly displayed." "I think she'd recognize it," Tom replied. "Everything she tried to protect, truth, justice, the future of Mill Haven, it all survived, just not in the way she expected." The morning crowd began to gather. Families of the circle's victims stood alongside reform advocates and community leaders. Lisa Thompson's daughter chatted with university researchers, documenting Mill Haven's transformation. Even some of the circle's former members' children attended, choosing truth over inherited loyalty. Tom noticed a young reporter interviewing Mary about the diner's role in preserving village memory. "The truth was always here," Mary was saying, "in every cup of coffee, every conversation we couldn't quite have. We just needed someone to shine a light on it." The dedication ceremony began with a simple act, the unlocking of the center's transparent doors. The key was a replica of Eleanor's, but its symbolism was clear. Mill Haven would never again be locked in darkness. Sarah took the podium, her grandmother's diary in hand. "A year ago, a fence repair cracked open 60 years of secrets. But the real story isn't about what was hidden. It's about what was revealed. The courage of those who kept truth alive. The strength of a community choosing light over shadow. The power of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Tom thought about all the small choices that had led to this moment. A handyman's careful attention, a librarian's preserved documents, a grandmother's protected diary, a daughter's hidden photographs, each one a thread in the tapestry of truth that had finally emerged. The morning sun climbed higher, casting no shadows in the center's transparent halls. Millhaven had transformed Eleanor's hidden chamber into an open forum, her secret passages into public walkways, her coded warnings into clear lessons for the future. After the ceremony, Tom returned to the fence one last time. He'd been hired to maintain it now, not to hide secrets, but to preserve memory. As he worked, he heard children's voices from the garden, asking questions about the village's history. Their curiosity was no longer met with silence, their questions no longer deflected. "Still at it, Mr. Barrett?" Sarah joined him, smiling. "Some repairs never really end," he replied. "They just turn into maintenance." Like truth, exactly like truth. Together, they watched Millhaven's newest generation explore their heritage without fear, learning that the strongest communities are built not on power or secrets, but on the enduring foundation of honest remembrance. The fence stood as it had for decades, but its purpose had changed. No longer a boundary between truth and lies, it now marked the point where a village had found its conscience, where a simple repair had sparked a revolution of truth. Eleanor's legacy lived on, not in hidden chambers or buried evidence, but in the open hearts and clear eyes of a community that had learned to face its past without flinching. The circle was finally broken, replaced by an endless spiral of truth leading toward tomorrow. The end.